Hi everyone, and welcome to my year in review. I've seen a few different YouTubers do this. I've seen a few different threads on Twitter where people basically go back through their year and do a bit of a retrospective. They look at what they've finished, they look at what they've accomplished, they look at what they could have done a bit better, and they look at what they might want to sort of do for the next year, I guess. Just like any good retrospective. So being a delivery manager, I really wanted to kind of jump in and also do the same thing. Why would I not do a retrospective on my year? So I'm going to record this, which sounds really bizarre, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe I never post this. I don't know, but I think it will be useful for me to get my thoughts out via this video somehow. So I'm mainly doing this for me because it helps me understand kind of what's gone well, what's gone not as well, what some of the mistakes I've made, and how I might want to go about fixing those things. So if you end up viewing this, cool, welcome, hi, welcome to my personal retrospective of my professional year. I've called it the professional year because I'm also going to do one about my personal year too. I'm going to probably do the same thing in terms of the same format. But I just wanted to try and keep those two things about as separate as I can, just in case there were topics covered which folks didn't feel like was appropriate. So here we go, my year in review 2020, the professional version. So we're going to start by going through what I've achieved, what held me back, what were some of my biggest mistakes, and what are some of my plans for 2020. I've found this formula really useful when I've been reading Twitter threads on this, other YouTubers too. I'll drop links in the video description below for some of those. They're really great and you should go check them out. They're probably much better than this one. Again, I'm doing this for me, and we'll see how this goes. These 4 questions were sort of enough of a retrospective for me personally to help me understand what went well, what maybe didn't go as well, and how I might want to improve myself for next year. So with that in mind, and before we dive into some of this, just a bit of who I am, because people often ask this in comments and stuff. So firstly, hi, my name is Jessica, I'm from the UK, my pronouns are she and her. So in terms of study, I've done a bunch of work in marketing before. I've got an MSc in marketing, studied at Harvard Business School for a bit too. And in terms of work, I've mainly focused on companies that start with a G. So Google, Guardian, GE. I'm currently in the government or public sector in a sort of consulting role, which I'm really enjoying. And so we'll see how that plays out into 2021. That's a little bit about what the video will cover, and then a little bit about who I am as a person. Let's dive into what I achieved. So what did I achieve professionally in 2020? And this is not, I'm not saying these things it's not a bragging session, it's not anything, this is the retrospective. For me, you just happen to be watching it because you might find it interesting, or you might want to go and do your own too. So please bear that in mind, this is not a bragging session or anything like that. It's just because I find it useful for me as part of my own personal retrospective. So what did I achieve? So at the start of the year, or towards the start of the year, I actually started a new job. Back in March, I believe, I left a role at The Guardian to join an organisation called Maytech. And The Guardian, for those who don't know, is a kind of, I guess, the world-leading liberal newspaper, and doing loads of really fun, interesting stuff with the digital team there. And I love the digital team at The Guardian. There are some amazing humans there. But I wanted a bit of a new challenge, so I joined Maytech, and at least at the moment, Maytech are a public services management consultancy. I use management consultancy. What I mean is sort of digital build, so they'll help government departments build different services and products and stuff like that, which is kind of fun. So that was the big thing that I did in terms of this year professionally. That was a big shift for me. We'll get on to a little bit about what held me back, because I think that's relevant to this point too, but don't worry, that's the next slide. In terms of other things I achieved this year, I led a project called the NHS Book a Virtual Visit project, and this won the UK IT Healthcare Project of the Year award, which is pretty cool. I've never won an award I don't think, for work that I've done before. So this is pretty awesome, and I was very, very excited. I think I probably said it way too many times to my colleagues, and I apologise if I got a bit boring saying those things over and over again. But it's pretty awesome. I'm really, really proud of the project that I did. The NHS Book of Virtual Visits, and I'll book a virtual visit. Sorry, I'll drop a link in the description below for that too. You should definitely go and check it out. It's pretty cool. It's an open source service, I guess, for the NHS, where patients inside of hospitals can book to have virtual visits with their with their loved ones, with their families, with whomever outside of the hospital. And this was really useful because at the start of the year, when the first wave of COVID hit back in March, or March, April time, hospitals were really struggling, and I guess they still are struggling now, but it was like the first time it had really happened towards the start of this year. And one of the ways in which they coped with this inside of the hospital was they banned visitations for basically everybody. I think there was like palliative care, which is like end of life care, where you could visit, but apart from that, nobody else was allowed to be visited. So you could be inside of hospital for COVID reasons, perhaps you're on a ventilator or something, or you could have slipped and fell and broken your hip or something, and also been inside of hospital too. And in both of those scenarios, you wouldn't have been allowed to have your family or your friends or whomever you wanted to speak to come and visit you like you normally would. So we built this service in 48 hours as an alpha, which is pretty cool. And we published it as open source software, so it's available online. Again, I'll drop a link in the description below for where you can go find that repo. It's pretty cool, you should go check it out. I was really, really impressed with this. Thousands and thousands of patients in the UK have been able to see and speak to their loved ones because of the work that the team did here, which is it's really cool. I don't think I'll ever stop talking about that project. It's pretty awesome. Other things I did this year, on top of that, I kicked off a remote coding bootcamp. So Maytech have a coding bootcamp called Academy. An academy is where they will pay individuals to basically learn how to be software engineers. Perhaps they've done a little bit already, and in their own rooms or something, and they feel like they want to take the first step. Maytech will pay them a wage for over 3 months or so, where they will go and basically learn how to be a software engineer. And then Maytech will put them into their first roles in the public sector, so they're doing kind of like really good, interesting work. So we did that. I sort of handed off that project before the first joiners actually joined the project, so I wasn't involved for the sort of everyday actual teaching of that project. I'm not sure anyone really wants to be taught coding by me, although I did do a couple of sessions on sort of agile and project management and what that means and software delivery and stuff like that. I sort of stepped away for the coding side of things, but I was involved right at the start. So building a business case, getting it signed off, and getting the first applications through. We actually managed to 4x applications year over year, which is pretty cool. Although at the time I remember thinking, why have we got so many people? There's so many CVs to review and all that sort of stuff. But it was really, really great. This one's a bit in progress as the bottom point. So I guess technically haven't achieved it yet, but will achieve it, or are on track to achieve it. Working on a project at the moment to migrate a life critical piece of software for the UK. If this thing goes down, people don't die immediately, but it's pretty soon. It's this really old legacy application, and we've basically been asked to help this government department move it into the cloud. So we're doing that at the moment. It's really, really fun. I'm learning and getting to depart knowledge onto others about all sorts of very interesting niche things. And the team at the moment who I'm working with on here are really great too. So I feel pretty happy and proud of the work I'm doing now, I guess. Okay, what held me back? This is the next topic, and this of course will be different for everybody. But again, I'm recording this video for me, because it helps me kind of go through that thinking process, and it helps me just, I guess, share with myself so I can look back at it in the future and know where I ended up at the end of 2020. So with that in mind, what held me back this year professionally? So I found myself a few times not being as forward as I could have been about the opportunities in which I wanted. So, and there's a sub-bullet point down below about scaling organisations, and I do believe scaling organisations are amazing places to be. I think seeing growth that's, you know, is really, really fun and really interesting. But it's also very different to a normal organisation. And I say normal organisation, and there is no normal organisation, but I mean, you know, one that's not growing. So with that, kind of looking back, I think that did hold me back. I think that's something I held myself back on. I wouldn't class it as a mistake, which is the next section below, which we'll get onto in a second. So I put it here because it did hold me back, but I think it was myself holding myself back, and it's, I don't know, kind of interesting. So the second one there is chasing avenues or different options with little payoff. So when things are moving so quickly, I found myself with like loads of different options of things that I could spend my time on, and I think specifically towards the start of this year, when it was, you know, the height of COVID, all the other excuses in the world, I found myself not necessarily doing as much due diligence as I could have done on which of those avenues I should have progressed in. And that meant that I was sort of, you know, chasing down these rabbit holes, and then there was a payoff at the end, but it perhaps wasn't as much of a payoff as it would have been for another of the rabbit holes. So yeah, I learned a lot with that. The third point there is really interesting, having to learn how to build relationships remotely overnight. So because of COVID, I actually onboarded to Maytech, the current organisation I'm working with, whilst remote. I had a phone interview beforehand. I had one face-to-face interview for about an hour or so pre-COVID, I think like the month before or something, and then I handed my notice in once I got an offer, and then ended up starting, I think it was like week 2 of lockdown or week 1 of lockdown or something. So I guess it's a fun fact that I've never set foot in an office, like a Maytech office, as a Maytech employee, which is kind of interesting. I guess for those folks who do like remote work all the time, that's not a big thing. For me, I actually don't mind remote work. I find it quite fun, I think. Overall, I think I find it quite fun. There's definitely some drawbacks, but I think that did hold me back, because it took me a good few days to kind of work out, okay, I need to switch my mindset from, hey, let's go grab a coffee about this thing, to, hey, let's go for like a walking meeting, or let's, you know, like have a Diet Coke together or something. I don't know, but just that mental shift of, okay, I'm expecting to see people in a physical location together, and then having to see them kind of not like that, was a bit of a learning curve for me, but one that I really enjoyed. I mentioned this point already, I think, but just to deep dive it a little bit more, being in a scaling organisation is amazing for a whole bunch of different reasons, but it definitely has its downsides. And I do think that held me back more than I was anticipating it to hold me back. Within the scaling organisation, I wasn't, I guess it was a scaling organisation during a pandemic whilst everyone was remote all the time. So, you know, this is, I think it's just a feature of the time in which we find ourselves, thus, you know, any malicious action or something like that. I think it just was how the cards were dealt, and that's absolutely fine. But yeah, I think there's definitely some drawbacks to, for me personally, about being involved in a scaling organisation. Number 1, whilst remote. Number 2, during a global pandemic. Number 3. So, you know, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but it's definitely something that I felt. At times, I let anxiety about COVID and where the world was going impact me negatively. I think there was like, you know, a Monday or something during the height of the pandemic, at least the first wave or two, The fact that there's multiple is mind-boggling. But the first wave or two, where I woke up and I was like, oh no, like a crying mess. I was like, what's going to happen? Like all the uncertainties that this new world leads us in. And I definitely I'm remembering like one day in particular, a good few months ago, where that impacted me more negatively than I'd like it to. But on the flip side of that, and I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, it was a global pandemic. Billions of people have died, and perhaps having a day or two where you don't feel your best is not the end of the world. However, if I'm thinking critically, it's something I could have done differently, so I've included it here. All right, now on to the fun stuff. What were my biggest mistakes of 2020? At least my biggest professional mistakes of 2020. If you're interested in the biggest personal mistakes, you should subscribe to my YouTube channel, because there's going to be a personal version of this retrospective coming out shortly too. I'm sure you'll enjoy that one. So, my biggest mistakes of 2020. I didn't accept an exciting opportunity because a better sounding opportunity was always kind of, very close to becoming true and becoming realised. And in retrospect, that was a mistake. I should have gone, there's a phrase that says like a bird in the hand is worth two birds in a bush, or something like that. But the idea that the devil you know is better than the one you don't, and all that sort of stuff. But I found myself kind of actively turning down very, very interesting opportunities, because there was this kind of alluding to some more interesting opportunities in the future, and the future being perhaps quite soon. But in reality, looking back on the year, I definitely should have accepted the opportunities that I had at the time, rather than foregoing those opportunities for perhaps a better sounding opportunity that wasn't yet realised. I mean, I could be sat here saying, had I have taken that opportunity and another opportunity had been realised, perhaps it would be the inverse of what I'm saying now, but it's not. So that's, I think, one of my biggest mistakes of the year. I also allowed myself I allowed my personal learning to take a back seat for most of this year, which in retrospect was a big mistake. I found myself not participating in those, not because I didn't find them valuable. The times in which I participated, I found them amazing, and I loved it. But I found myself not participating more often than not, because I was perceived to be too busy, and perhaps meetings were put in over that time, or some extra work that didn't finish in the week had to be finished on the Friday afternoon, or whatever it was. But I found myself feeling like I had an obligation to not do that, as in not do that, as in not do the work, but not do the learning portion, because there was too much work on my plate. And in retrospect, which is what the whole idea of this video is, that was a huge mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I should have focused on my learning, and I should have said no, and I should have pushed stuff until the next week, or whatever paid whatever the kind of corporate price was for that behaviour, because I now find myself in a setting where I'm now on holiday during Christmas and the New Year, at least in the UK here, and I found myself spending this time learning rather than relaxing, and so that I'll pay the price in the future for that, perhaps. But yeah, that's one of my biggest mistakes of the year. As the third and final one of the biggest mistakes of the year, when I joined the current organisation I work with, Maytech, I perceived them as an organisation that didn't have kind of this big overlord corporate structure to it, and I really loved that about the organisation. And again, it was one of the main reasons why I kind of made the decision to move on from The Guardian and some of the amazing digital team there, into this current organisation, was the sort of perceived lack of kind of corporate games and the corporate games like, oh, you have to keep people CC'd in emails, and after you have a meeting with somebody, you have to send emails about the meeting and emails about the emails about the emails and all of that sort of stuff. All the stuff that doesn't actually drive value. It just makes people feel better inside of big corporations. And it's like, that's why I've called it the corporate game. I actively didn't play that game during this year or most of the year at Maytech. And in retrospect, I think there were a few examples where that hurt me because I didn't do that, which is really interesting. When I first joined, I can't. So the examples I'm thinking of are examples where they're more recent examples. So perhaps this is a sort of byproduct of kind of hyperscaling and also being remote and also being month 10 or whatever it is in the UK of a global pandemic. So all the excuses in the world, but there have definitely been a few concrete examples where we're not playing that game, or that corporate game that I'm calling it. So, for example, not sending an email after having a harmless meeting with somebody, or not confirming action items on action items from the meeting last week or whatever it was, have come back to bite me. And I don't want to play that corporate game. It's something that I actively want to avoid. Instead, I'd rather spend my time delivering and unlocking value. That's the thing I want to do. Don't want to kind of send emails and for email's sake. In the example of emails, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well. But yeah, I think that's, I'm rambling a bit now, but I think that's one of my biggest mistakes. Alright, so one of my plans for 2020, I'm really excited about this one. So I found that in sort of perceived downtime this year, that my brain hasn't worked very well. So when I'm not working at full capacity, or if my day isn't completely full of very interesting work, then I find my brain doesn't work for my brain. I need to be. I found this year that I definitely need to be actively working. So I need to have stuff to do, but that stuff to do needs to be very interesting and in depth, and I need to be able to sort of like deep dive into those individual bits of stuff to do. Otherwise, like, my brain turns off. It doesn't, like, I don't get the most from myself when that happens, and I have to work harder to do that, which I'm not adverse to working harder. It's just brain-wise that doesn't work for me. So basically, expect lots of very fast-paced work in 2021. I'm going to focus, or at least going to try and focus, on bigger, more challenging problem areas. This is something that I found really interesting, where I can devote some time and devote some sort of brain attention to deep diving specific challenging areas and then understanding that space really, really well. I'd also like to do an in-person talk post-vaccine, so when it's all safe and all that good stuff to do, I think it would be really fun to get up on a stage or something similar and do a talk. I've done a few remote ones this year that have been really exciting. There was one I remember specifically for the Leeds Digital Festival that was really fun, and I had an absolute blast doing that. So I'd like to do more of those, but as those switch into in-person events, perhaps next year at some point, fingers crossed, then I'd like to participate in those. I'm going to try and focus on communities. I kind of touched on this in the challenging problem areas, but I've learned something this year that when we think about a community of people, perhaps it's folks working in the public sector, for example, of a community, or the people building digital tools for the NHS, or whatever it might be, just a group of individuals, a community. I've learned that we all grow together, and that this, whatever this is now in this kind of current climate, this isn't a zero-sum game. So in previous years and many years ago for business and consulting and whatever, you had to be at the top, otherwise you would fail, and that's the whole idea of a zero-sum game, and I don't think that's true anymore. In fact, I'm willing to bet a portion of my career that it isn't true anymore, by instead focusing on communities. I've also got a very exciting announcement coming in January, so please click the subscribe bell somewhere, either here or here. I don't know, I haven't done that yet, but it's somewhere down below. I think you'll really. I've got some very exciting plans for January and beyond in 2021, both for this YouTube channel that you're viewing this on and kind of other stuff as well. So please stay subscribed and like this video, because apparently the YouTube algorithm needs people to like videos now. So if you could drop a like, which is what I think the cool YouTube people say, that would be really helpful. Yeah, so watch out for some really cool announcements. And that's it for my 2020 year in retrospective. It's been TLDR, it's been a great year. COVID has sucked. It hasn't been fun because of COVID, and I'm trying my best to keep myself safe, keep others safe, and yeah, I have a very interesting COVID story about where I myself had COVID. I'm going to put that in the personal version of this, which should also be uploaded onto my channel in the next few hours, so take a look out for that. Anyway, thank you for listening. I did this for myself, and if you've bothered to kind of listen all this way, then perhaps you really enjoyed it. I don't know, but if you did, please like and subscribe, and have a lovely day. Thanks.